This tutorial is going to show you how to add detail lines, notes, and dimensions in wall sections and floor plan details. Detail lines are like lines in AutoCAD that we add when we don't have components or hatches that show information that we need. One important thing about detail lines is that when you're drawing in Revit, we actually have this tool at the very top called the Thin Lines tool. And what that does is it makes it easier for us to see the drawing as we're drawing because it doesn't show all the lines in the final line weight that will be plotted from Revit. We want to turn that tool on, and that makes a really big difference when we start looking at these things. Part of the issue that we see here is that the lines look too thick, but the scale is not appropriate. We actually need to change the scale to either be 1.5 inches equals a foot or 3 inches equals a foot, which is typically what we use for zoomed in floor plan details. You notice once I change over to 1.5 inches equals a foot, those line weights look pretty good. So what we might need to do is go to our detail lines and click a line, and then we have to think about what the line thickness needs to be. I'm going to draw something that's going to simulate the membrane because it's not something that's actually a detail component. So I can go and I can click on a medium line and I can draw it on the outside of my sheathing. And we can see that it's not super noticeable. It may not be thick enough. So we can click on it and we can change that medium line to a wide line. And that actually gives it more presence. And of course we're going to need to add a note and call it out as well. Now if I do a thin line, that's too thin, so I need to go back and make sure that that's a wide line. So now I'm going to do notes like we did before, where I click on text. I make sure I have the 2 segment line clicked and that the text is 1/8 Arial. And I'm going to click on that membrane line and I'm going to say membrane. And I want to make sure again that I'm using all caps because that is the industry standard. I want to make sure that it's not outside of my crop line, so I'm going to turn on my crop line really quickly. And if it's outside of the crop line, as I add notes, it might actually disappear. So let me show you what can happen there. And you notice I get an error from Revit saying that's not in my view. And that's because I extended a little too far outside of that crop line, but because the crop line is hidden, I can't tell. The note is still there, so if I turn the crop line on and then I hit do not crop, I can see where it is falling outside of that crop line, and I can click on the move tool and move it closer. Now obviously I don't want my text to overlap the drawing, so I can then adjust the text and make it 2 lines instead of 1, and now not crop, and turn off that crop line. And the only issue I have is that my notes are now not aligned, and luckily Revit gives me guides as I move things around, and now my notes align. I want to be careful and make sure that my leader lines don't overlap the drawings too much and make confusion between what is a line from the drawing and what is a leader line. We can also add dimensions. And similar to what we saw before, we need to make sure we click on something and then place that dimension. And here you notice I'm using the dimension that's rounded up. I actually, since it's more detailed, may want to go back to the original. 1 foot 7 3/8 may be a little too detailed, so I might need to make another one that again rounds it to 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. But that's how you add detail lines, notes, and dimensions to floor plan details, and you can do the same thing in your wall section.